Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. In today's video, we're going to be installing our off-grid cargo floor system in the back of our 100 series Land Cruiser. We're going to start things off with some disassembly here in the back of the vehicle. Now, if your vehicle is still equipped with the third row seats, those will first need to be removed. The vehicle itself has some instructions over on the side panel in here, so we're not going to walk through all of that and kind of take up your time with that disassembly and removal, but we're going to be working to remove the carpet from the rear section of this floor. Now, the first step in that process is to remove this rear cover. That's just held in with 5 Phillips head screws along this edge. With those removed, the only thing really holding this in is a small clip out on each end into the side trim panels. So you should just have to pop that up and this can be removed. From there, we're going to remove all of the kind of plastic trim pieces around the rear or third row seat mounting latches. We're going to start with the rearmost ones back here. These are just kind of clipped on, so you can get under the front edge and pull up to remove those. The remaining 6 covers in here are all held in with just one Torx head screw on the back edge, kind of right in here. And if you have these center covers in place as well, just pop those free. You can then get that screw out of the way and lift these out. Now, you will also need to come up here and just fold up your second row seats and remove these 2 covers temporarily. That just allows us to fold this section of carpet out of the way for now. These again are those same Torx head screws, and these should pop out pretty easily. With those 2 out of the way, you'll then separate the 2 carpet sections, just pulling the Velcro free across here. This rear section is going to be removed from the vehicle, and this front section, like I said, will just kind of be folded up and out of the way for now. Now, this may not want to just stay up and out of the way on its own. That's fine. You'll just, when you get to this step, kind of flip it out of the way and be gaining access to this front set of cargo tie-down hooks. We can then come back and remove the remaining rear carpet section. The only thing really holding this in at this point is the fact that it's underneath the outside trim sections, and it kind of slides in around the rear cargo hooks and the seat belt on the passenger side. So kind of pull everything free from there and pull this out of the vehicle. Now, most of the brackets you see under here can stay. They're not going to get in the way of the floor. However, the 2 kind of right here out on each side do need to be removed. For that, you'll need a 14mm socket. Now, just to kind of seal these holes back up, you can reinstall that factory hardware there. Now, this front set of tow hooks underneath that second row carpet needs to be removed as well. That's where you're going to bolt the front of the floor in place. So you'll remove this using a 10mm socket. At this point, out here on your bench or your cart, you can grab the main frame rail components and begin getting this assembled. So these are going to be the parts numbered 1 through 4. The part numbers are cut out in all of these rails, and they start with a 100, as it's a 100 series Land Cruiser, and then the last digit is what identifies the actual part number. Now, you do have 2 identical parts numbered 2. Those are going to be the outside rails. One will simply just have to get flipped around to be the left and right. So for now, I'm going to set number 4 off to the side, and then we'll get these bolted in to number 1, which is going to be the logo plate as well as kind of the rearmost rail assembly. So just due to space constraints, I set number 3 off to the side as well. I'm just going to set one of these number 2 rails over here for the moment and take the other one. I'll flip it around with the kind of more solid edge to be the outside and get that lined up with the mounting holes here on this rear rail. So as far as the mounting holes go, there's going to be 2 in each end of these rails that line up with 2 on the back mounting flange on this number 4 rail here. And to bolt those together, you're going to have 1/2 inch long, 1/4 20 button head bolts with black washers and 1/4 serrated flange nuts to go along with those. Now really the easiest way to assemble the frame is upside down like you see it here, and you can then take that 1/4 hardware, line the rails up, and get that started. It's not necessarily critical how the hardware goes in place on the bottom side here. Just do it in a way that you can access the bolt head with your tools for tightening purposes. So pushing each of these down flat against the table so we know they're nice and square. I've got a 5/32 hex to drive the bolt head side here, and then typically with the serrated flange nuts you can just hold them and tighten this up. Worst case scenario, you can grab a 7/16 wrench for the nut side. We'll then repeat that process with the second number 2 rail in the other set of outside mounting holes. With both of those outside rails in, you can grab rail number 3. Now this one you just want to pay attention and look for this centered cutout towards one end. That is going to go towards this logo rail at the back for hardware access once this is installed. Then again, you can tighten that up with your 5/32 hex, making sure these are both pushed down tight. Now with all 3 of those bolted in, it should look like what you see here, and then we can spin it around and bolt number 4 to the forward edge. So with number 4 in hand and the frame in this orientation, you'll want the opening, if you will, or the open end of this to install and face toward the front of the vehicle. So something like what you see here. And again, we'll flip this over for ease of hardware access. With the frame upside down, you can just get another look at it here. You'll again be installing 1/4 button heads to bolt this frame to this forward rail. Go ahead and repeat that hardware installation process to all 3 mounting rails. Then with all 6 fasteners started across this back edge, grab that 5/32 and tighten things up. So your assembled frame should look like what you see here. Now for the sake of space, so that we can work on those outer trim panels that you see on the cart, I'm going to get this out of the way for just a moment. Now these panels are numbered as well, 6 and 7. So number 6 will be the driver's side panel, number 7 will be the passenger side. And basically all you're doing here is finding the provided edge trim to go in place on the kind of notched out section of this outer edge. This will need to be cut to length, so you can kind of split this open with either a screwdriver or just your thumbnails to get it started on one end and work it all the way around this edge and trim it up at the end. So once you get to the opposite end, you can just kind of line that up and cut it off with some wire cutters, a razor blade, something sharp, whatever you have available, and finish pressing that in place. You'll then just repeat that process with a second piece of trim on the other panel. With the trim now on both panels, we can grab our frame and bolt these in place. Now each of these is going to have 4 bolt holes. It's going to bolt together with, you probably guessed it, 1/4 button head hardware with flange locking nuts. These are going to bolt to the outside of these number 2 rails and overlap the top of this rear rail. So both of those can be bolted in before this goes into the vehicle, and this is what your fully assembled frame should look like. Just before you put the frame in the back of the vehicle, you will want to reinstall this rear trim panel slash kind of tailgate gap filler. And if you'll remember correctly from our disassembly, this is the one that used the 5 Phillips head screws. Now the only other thing you may need to address in here before the floor goes in place is this passenger side seat belt. The reason for that is the floor and the outer trim panel is going to overlap this seat belt mounting location. We're going to leave this in place. That's our intention. We're essentially just going to let the seat belt rest up against the edge trim that we installed on our outer trim panel. We're going to leave the seat belt kind of in the factory seat belt retainer up here and just kind of let that be. If you wish to remove it, you can. Again, now is when you would want to get it unbolted from here. There's just not really anywhere to put it up along here once you have it unbolted. So you'll wind up having to pull this entire trim panel and basically remove the entire seatbelt assembly from this side of the vehicle. If you do choose to remove that, it's just a 14mm socket for the bolt down here in the floor. And then from there, obviously you'll have a little bit of that to figure out on your own to get that seat belt tidied up. Once you figured out what you're doing there, we can grab our floor frame. You will have to kind of tilt it up on its side and we can slide it into the back of the vehicle. Now this whole assembly can be slid in here with our upper shelf in place, but if you are running a basket, it will have to be removed for this step. Once you have the floor laid in here, you are going to need to come up through the back doors to install the hardware in these outside corners. Now the threaded hole you're looking for up here is the same hole where we removed the factory tie-down hooks earlier on. In these locations, you're going to be using the pretty much only silver hardware in your bolt pack, but these are M6 button heads with silver kind of oversized washers. Go ahead and reach inside of here and start each of these by hand. If you have any issues with the threads in these factory holes and need to clean them out, you'll use an M6 by 1.0 tap. Now when it comes to tightening these, you're going to want a 4mm hex. Something like this ball-ended Allen driver works really well through the upper mounting hole here and down into the fastener. You could also use a T-handle in the same fashion. This one is just a hex end. Again, ideally a ball end would work just a little bit better here. And worst case scenario, you just get a conventional Allen wrench and take a little bit more time turning this from underneath. We are just going to kind of lightly snug these up for now and then go to the back of the vehicle and kind of check some alignment of our floor frame before securing this down. So while that front hardware is still just a little bit loose, you first want to kind of check the outside edge of these outside rails to the outside plastic trim panels and make sure that this looks visually centered in the vehicle. And then from there, you'll come back and check kind of this back edge against the rear trim panel here. Basically what you're looking for here is this edge to be kind of even on all of these recessed mounting holes for the fasteners in this trim panel. So if anything seems super out of square here, you have some adjustability again in those slots. You can slide it side to side and then pull this side to side just a little bit as well to kind of center and line things up. Once that front hardware is tight, you're happy with the way the alignment looks, you then want to just double check that your floor frame is nice and square. So a couple ways you can do this. One quick and easy one is just to take a tape measure and measure all the way up to the front corner of that number 4 rail, because that's got a nice 90-degree corner. You can hook the tape measure on and then measure back to the outside threaded mounting hole back here. You can take that measurement and kind of do an X, if you will. Do the same thing in that direction. You're looking for those measurements to be essentially the same. If it's like a 1/16 of an inch off, that's probably fine, as the floor frame and the mounting panels up top do have a little bit oversized holes to compensate for a little bit of adjustability there. The other thing you could do is simply loosely install those panels with a couple of the corner fasteners in place so that you know everything is nice and square and lines up well. You do want to take the time to complete this step now, because once you get everything in, if you start having alignment issues with the threaded fasteners going into the pre-installed nuts here, you'll have to pull all that back out of the way and kind of loosen up some of these rails to make any adjustments there. So now is the time to get that done. So once you're confident in your floor frame, the way it looks, it's nice and square, and you have it where you want it, you're going to need to come back to the rear of the frame and mark the 3 mounting tabs so that we can drill and install the provided rib nuts or rivet nuts that you see here in these 3 locations. So I just have a silver Sharpie here. You just want to make sure you have something that's going to show up on your floor. And then holding down on the frame with one hand, we're going to mark out the slot here and repeat that for the other 2 tabs on this back rail. Now once you do have all 3 of those marked out, remember the center one is down through the center cutout in this rail. You'll want to go back and remove the 2 M6 button head bolts up front, allowing you to one time quickly remove this from the back of the vehicle so that you can access those marked hole locations for drilling. Now for your drilling process, it's going to be the same on all 3 of your slotted hole locations. We're just going to show you one over here. You'll first need to center punch right in the center of that slot you just traced out. So what you'll do there is start with a smaller pilot hole. I just have an 1/8 inch bit here that I'll start out with, and then step up through multiple sizes until you get to that 17/32. So centering up on your punch mark, you can go ahead and drill your first hole. And then you'll continue working your way up through your stepped series of drill bits. Now, something I really should have pointed out beforehand, and you'll want to make sure you do before you start drilling, is there is a factory wire harness that runs underneath the floor down below the vehicle. So you'll need to get on a creeper or get this thing up in a lift so you can take a panel pry tool like I have here and pop all the clips holding that wire harness into the factory substructure there. That way you get that harness down, out of the way. That way it can't be damaged during any of this drilling. Once you have that 17-30 seconds hole drilled, just take your riv nut real quick and double check that it's going to fit nicely down through the hole, and then you can come back and clean up any of the shavings that you have left over. So what you've been seeing me use here to kind of check those riv nuts is our riv nut installation tool that we provide. This is just a couple washers, a kind of large oversized nut, and a 5/16 hex head bolt that passes easily through that nut, and then a riv nut threaded on the end. Generally speaking, this is going to come to you assembled like this, but if not, go ahead and assemble that yourself. And then to use this when installing the riv nuts, you're going to need an 11/16 wrench to hold that center nut and a 1/2 inch socket ideally to drive the bolt through the center. Now, we do recommend both to seal these up and help prevent corrosion that you put a little bit of RTV silicone sealant on the riv nut before it goes in the hole you just drilled. So go ahead and spread some of that on there, and then carefully put that down in the hole. This is when you'll grab that wrench to hold the nut, and I'm kind of pressing down on this to hold the riv nut and washer assembly nice and flat to our floor surface. And then I'm just going to start turning the bolt, kind of compressing the knurled edge on that riv nut using our ratchet and socket. You're going to want to try and hold the wrench as steady as possible during this process. And you will feel this kind of start to tighten up as it's compressing against the bottom of the sheet metal on the factory floor here. Once that's compressed, you're essentially just tightening a bolt into a nut. So kind of use your judgment on the way this feels, but make sure you get that nice and tight so that your riv nut is fully compressed and it's not going to move in that sheet metal. And then go ahead and back the bolt out so you can remove the tool assembly. With the tool removed, you can kind of wipe up any excess RTV that you may have on the riv nut and the sheet metal here so you can get a good look at things. You can then get in here and make sure that it looks like it's nice and compressed against the floor sheet metal. And if for any reason this looks like it's crooked in any fashion, you can actually take that bolt, typically just by itself, but you can thread it back in and take a hammer and just gently tap it either direction. Make sure if you're going to do this that you have good thread engagement on the bolt so you don't damage the threads inside of the riv nut. And it's always a good idea after the fact to kind of recompress that just to double check that you didn't loosen it up on that sheet metal during that process. Additionally, just to play it safe in the event that you're tapping on the bolt so you don't bend it and then have to use it to install more riv nuts, go ahead and get all three installed before you do anything like that to kind of aid in the bolt alignment there. Once you've done that, you'll reinstall a new riv nut from your bolt pack onto the tool and continue on with the remaining two holes. Once you have all three of your riv nuts installed back here and that part is complete, you're happy with everything there, there's just a couple things we need to tidy up or finish up inside the vehicle here before installing our frame for the final time. So when you had the frame in earlier on, you may have or you likely noticed that there were a couple holes here, one on each side, where the factory trim would have been installed before. Since we had to remove the bracket in this location, the trim no longer has anything to truly fasten to. It's just got a couple like slotted tabs back here that slide into the factory plastic and kind of loosely retain it. And the way it sticks out, it actually interferes with our floor frame. So if you're worried about filling those holes, you are gonna have to kind of cut and modify these trim panels, as well as figure out a way to retain them once the floor is in place. The floor frame does add a little bit of pressure to the side of it right here, depending on how you cut it, but the front of this is still likely gonna be loose, so you'll likely want to use some sort of adhesive to kind of glue this to the factory trim section here. Other than that, we just need to go back up to our front mounting holes. We'll now fold the factory carpet back into position, or kind of its factory position, and make a couple small cuts on it there so that we can access our mounting hardware and kind of tuck that carpet in neatly under our floor frame during the final install. So up here you have a slot that the factory cargo tie down used to slide up through. That should line up pretty well with the actual mounting hole for the frame. However, with the way our tab comes in here and is bent, you're gonna need to make a couple cuts kind of straight back in this section toward the rear of the vehicle. There's no real rhyme or reason to this. It's not a specific measurement, but roughly an inch straight back is a good starting point. I'm just gonna use a sharp razor knife here, as it works pretty well to cut through this carpet. Again, I'm just kind of estimating an inch. It's not super critical in this location, as it's all going to be hidden under the floor. But I'm going to work my way forward to the slot. Do the same thing on the other side. And that should leave kind of a little flap here. You may want to get in here and cut out some of that old foam padding, or at least kind of cut it in the same fashion so that it can get up and out of the way. You can always cut just a little bit more if needed. Now, if for some reason your carpet fits a little bit differently and this front edge happens to be covering that mounting hole in any fashion, that will need to be trimmed out as well. But once you have a flap kind of like that on each side, you are ready to reinstall your floor frame. So once you have a flap like that on each side, you can now see that worst case scenario, if you ever went back to stock, you just need to kind of tuck that back in, and it's going to look relatively clean and kind of be unnoticeable. And then you can take and reinstall the two trim pieces for the kind of rear or second row seat latches down in here to hold the center section of the carpet in place. Just to give you a quick look at it, you can see kind of the carpet now tucked under the floor frame. We're not going to show you sliding the floor frame back in because you already went through that once, as well as saw these fasteners, but you do want to make sure that these tabs in the mounting locations up here get all the way down through that hole in the carpet so they seat tight to the sheet metal on the floor. And that kind of leaves your little flap that you cut, if you will, tucked right in this front corner of the frame. From there, just take your second row seats and make sure they latch back in properly. Go ahead and flip those back up out of the way, and that way you won't have any issues there once everything is installed. Now you can come back here and you'll want to find the 3 black 5/16 button heads in your bolt pack, along with the larger 5/16 washers. These are going to be installed into those 3 rib nuts that you put back here. So go ahead and start all 3 of these by hand. Then moving back here, you'll now want to find the 3 5/16 black button heads along with larger 5/16 washers in your bolt pack. There's only going to be 3 of each of these, so they should be pretty easy to identify. Ideally, you'll start with the center one, because this allows you to kind of lift up the frame just a little bit and drop the bolt and washer down in from underneath, since this one's a little bit tight access through that top slot, if you will, in that center rail. You can then reach down through with your 3/16 hex to kind of guide that bolt into that center rib nut. Once you have that one started, you can take the other 2 and just thread them by hand into the 2 outside tab and rib nut locations. Then again, with your 3/16 hex, you can tighten up the 3 along the back here, and if you haven't done so already, go back up front with your 4mm and tighten those front 2 mounting bolts. With the floor frame now tight in the vehicle, you can find your floor panels, and how you proceed from here really kind of depends on how you intend to use the floor and whether or not you have your accessories at the time you're doing this install. So if you're just doing this to kind of be a third row seat delete and kind of rear floor platform, all you really need to do at this time is install these rear panels. You'll do that with the part number toward the front of the vehicle, and you'll be looking for the kind of half circle cutouts on one side of this panel to go in toward the center on that center rail. From there, you'll just slide these in and begin lining up kind of the perimeter mounting fasteners. Along each of the rails, you'll have pre-installed 1/4-20 nuts on here, everywhere that you need to bolt the panel down. All the way up on that front rail, or crossbar if you will have to reach underneath and install nuts like we would have done when bolting the frame together. When bolting these in, it should just be 5 fasteners up each of these rails, including the center one where they overlap, and then 1 in the center of each panel on each end. Now where this gets just a little bit more involved or even tedious is when you're actually mounting the accessories to these floor panels. A couple reasons for that. One, you have either nut strips for the drawers or nut tabs for the fridge slide that need to be bolted to this panel. Those will then be the mounting fasteners that you're going to secure those accessories to these floor panels with. So you'll want to know the layout in which you intend to kind of install those accessories when you're going to install those mounting tabs. Now the longer ones that you see here are for the drawers. Those are going to come with your floor platform whether you're installing them or not, whereas the smaller or shorter ones that I have here are only going to come with your fridge slide and are really only used for mounting that fridge slide. So on this 100 series specifically, you have multiple hole patterns to mount your accessories. Your drawers, for example, are only going to use 4 of these slots for mounting, so that gives you kind of the freedom to shift these further into the vehicle if you want more storage space at the back behind your drawer assemblies, or kind of shove them all the way to the back if you kind of want some storage space to be tucked in behind the drawers, kind of between there and that second row seating. So you'll need to have your accessories at least partially assembled or at least on hand so that you can kind of lay that out the way you want it and figure out where you want these mounting tabs to go. As for how to assemble those accessories, the drawers and the fridge slides, for example, you'll want to watch the individual installation and assembly videos for those on the product page where you purchase those accessories. From there, when you're bolting these in, I'll start out with the nut strip, if you will, for the drawers. You'll just slide this on what will be the bottom side of your floor panel. You can then take 1 bolt with a washer. These are the 1/4-20 by 1/2 inch long button heads that you've used throughout the frame assembly. You can kind of slide that in there and start it to secure the tab to this floor panel, and then just to align it so that it's not going to rotate and that everything lines up nicely with your slots, you can just take 1 more bolt and loosely start it into either end of this nut strip. This is again another spot where you kind of want to have your layout figured out, because you'll know whether or not you want to slide this toward the center or out toward the side of the vehicle. I'm just going to put this in the center of the panel for now, and then you'll take your 5/32 hex, tighten up that center bolt to secure the strip to the floor panel. You can then come back and remove this outside bolt, and then these mounting locations are where your drawer will bolt down. When mounting the fridge slide, again, you're just using the smaller tabs, and those are going to go into kind of the 2-hole patterns out along each end. So there, it's just a little bit different. You'll take 1 of those 1/4-20 button heads and slide it into the non-threaded end of that tab with a nut on the back side. So the only real difference here being that it doesn't have a pre-installed nut in that location. And then again, loosely install another button head into the threaded side. Again, just take the 5/32 hex at that time and tighten the bolt into the nut. And then remove that outside, just kind of alignment bolt at that time, leaving the threaded hole location for your fridge slide to bolt into. Very similar to the drawer mounting tabs. So as for the remainder of our install, since we're not mounting any accessories to our floor at this very time, I'm just going to pull these out and slide this panel back in on our frame and kind of line everything up and install the mounting hardware. With your floor panels both in, make sure you get all of this hardware kind of loosely started, and then you can kind of double check the panel alignment, mostly just looking at the center here, but also a little bit along the outside edges. And then grab your 5/32 hex and tighten all of this button head hardware. Once you have all that hardware tight, the actual floor installation is complete, and it's just up to you to get your accessories kind of located and mounted at that point. From there, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or give us a call at 269-459-8447.